The damp $5 bill felt like sandpaper in Christian's pocket. It was his safety net. Emergency bus fare. Tomorrow's coffee. A cheap bribe for a screaming toddler. When he handed it to the woman shivering under the flickering neon of a grim gas station, he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like an idiot. He walked away angry at his own bleeding heart. He had no idea the woman holding his crumpled Lincoln was Camille Dubois, his new CEO. The rain wasn't dramatic. It was just an irritating, relentless drizzle that turned the city of Seattle into a cold, wet sponge. Christian sat in his 10-year-old sedan, the wipers squeaking against the glass in a rhythm that gave him a localized headache right behind his left eye. The car smelled of stale Cheerios, damp upholstery, and the lingering metallic scent of his own exhaustion. He stared through the windshield at the glowing green awning of the convenience store. His bank app, glowing too bright in the dark cabin, displayed a checking balance of $114. Payday was Thursday. Today was Tuesday. In his right coat pocket, his fingers traced the outline of a single, folded $5 bill. He had found it wedged between the couch cushions that morning. That $5 was the difference between his 4-year-old daughter, Lily, eating her preferred brand of oat cereal tomorrow morning, or throwing a tantrum that would inevitably make him late for work. Christian killed the engine. The silence was immediate and oppressive. He grabbed his coat, pushed the heavy door open, and stepped into the puddles. The cold water seeped instantly through the worn sole of his left shoe. He swore softly, a reflex, and jogged toward the sliding glass doors. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a sickly, insectoid buzz. The air smelled of floor wax, old hot dogs, and burnt coffee. Christian headed straight for the dairy aisle, grabbing a half-gallon of milk. He turned toward the register and stopped. There was a woman standing at the counter. She didn't belong here. Even soaked to the bone, with her dark hair plastered flat against her skull and a smudge of grease on her cheek, she radiated an alien kind of authority. She was wearing a trench coat that, before the mud and rain, probably cost more than Christian's car. Now it was heavy with water, dripping steadily onto the scuffed linoleum. "I am trying to explain to you," she was saying, her voice tight, controlled, but vibrating with a very specific kind of panic. "My car battery is completely dead. My phone is inside it, also dead. I left my handbag at the office. I just need to use your landline to call a tow service." The clerk, a teenager with a prominent jawline and a name tag that read Kevin, chewed his gum with agonizing slowness. "Phones for employees only, lady. Store policy. I will give you $100 tomorrow if you let me dial a single local number," she said. "I don't have $100 now," Kevin replied, possessing the absolute, unbothered apathy of someone making minimum wage. "There's a payphone outside." "Which requires coins," the woman snapped, her composure cracking just a fraction. "Or a calling card. Do I look like I have coins?" "Not my problem." Christian watched her shoulders drop. It was a subtle movement, but the defeat in it was palpable. She touched her forehead, closing her eyes. She was freezing. Christian could see the slight tremor in her hands. He looked down at the milk in his hand. He needed this milk. He needed his $5. He was already drowning in his own life. He didn't have the bandwidth to throw a life preserver to a stranger who clearly lived in a different tax bracket, despite her current predicament. He should just walk to the counter, ignore her, pay for his milk, and go home to his sleeping daughter and the mountain of laundry waiting for him. Instead, Christian stepped forward. He didn't do it with a smile. He didn't feel a warm glow of charity in his chest. He felt profoundly irritated by his own inability to just look away. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the crumpled $5 bill, and slapped it on the counter between her and Kevin. "Give her whatever she needs for the phone," Christian said. His voice was gravelly from lack of sleep. "And give me change for the milk." The woman turned to him, startled. Her eyes were sharp, a piercing, icy grey. Up close, he could smell her, a faint trace of expensive, woody perfume cutting through the scent of wet wool. She didn't look grateful. She looked confused, like she was trying to calculate his angle. "I don't need your money," she said defensively. "Good, because I barely have it," Christian replied flatly. "But you're shivering, and this guy is an idiot, and I want to go home. Take the money. Buy a charger from the rack. Make your call." She stared at the $5 bill as if it were a foreign object. Then she looked back at Christian. I will repay you. Give me your name. Your card." "I don't have cards," Christian said, tossing the milk to Kevin. "Just keep moving. It's too cold to stand still." He paid for his milk, took his 80 cents in change, and walked out of the store. He didn't look back. As he started his car, the heater blasting lukewarm air against his damp face, the anger settled in. "You moron," he thought. "Now you have 80 cents. Good job. Real hero." He put the car in drive and pulled away, leaving the glowing neon island behind in the dark. The morning was a masterclass in chaos. Christian woke up at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of a toy fire truck blaring its siren in the living room. He rolled out of bed, his joints popping, his mouth tasting like old copper. The apartment was freezing. The radiator hissed, spitting out more noise than heat. "Daddy, hungry," Lily announced as he dragged himself into the kitchen. She was sitting on the cold linoleum, wearing mismatched socks and clutching a stuffed rabbit that had lost one ear. Christian poured the milk he'd bought last night over a bowl of cheap, generic cornflakes. He watched her eat, a hollow ache in his own stomach. He drank a glass of tap water and swallowed 2 ibuprofen. By 7:15 a.m., he had dropped Lily off at Mrs. Higgins's home daycare, a crowded, loud living room that smelled of baby wipes and boiled carrots, but the only place he could afford. By 8:00 a.m., he was standing on a crowded subway train, squeezed between a man eating an egg sandwich and a high schooler blasting tinny music from cheap headphones. Christian stared at his reflection in the dark glass of the train doors. He looked exactly how he felt. 34, exhausted, wearing a grey suit that was a little too loose in the shoulders, and a tie with a nearly invisible coffee stain near the knot. He worked at Praxis Holdings, a massive, faceless conglomerate that ate smaller companies for breakfast and liquidated them by lunch. Christian didn't do the eating or the liquidating. He fixed the computers of the people who did. He was a Tier 2 IT support technician, a ghost in the machine. When he arrived at the office building, a towering monolith of glass and steel in the financial district, the atmosphere was noticeably toxic. People weren't just walking to their desks, they were scurrying. Christian swiped his badge and took the elevator down to the basement where IT was housed. It was a windowless cavern filled with the hum of servers and the pale glow of monitors. "You're late," his supervisor, a nervous man named Todd with a terrible comb-over, snapped as Christian hung up his wet coat. "The train stalled," Christian said, booting up his workstation. "What's the panic? Everyone upstairs looks like they're waiting for an execution." "They are," Todd whispered, leaning in. He smelled like sour peppermint. "The new CEO is here today. Board called an emergency session. Camille Dubois. She's ruthless. Christian. They call her the Guillotine. She gutted her last tech firm, fired half the executive suite on day 1. We're on a strict no errors protocol. You do not speak to anyone above floor 40 unless spoken to. You fix their issues, and you fade into the walls. Got it?" I always fade into the walls, Todd. It's in my job description. Christian clicked through his ticket queue. His head throbbed. He didn't care about a billionaire CEO playing musical chairs with executives. He cared about surviving until 5 p.m. without losing his mind, picking up his daughter, and figuring out how to feed them dinner with 80 cents in his pocket. He was planning to steal a box of granola bars from the break room before he'd left. The morning dragged. Passwords reset. Frozen spreadsheets resurrected. Printers unjammed. Christian moved through the lower floors like a mechanic on an assembly line. Around 1:30 p.m., his pager beeped. Yes, a pager. The executives at Praxaxis insisted on an archaic paging system for critical priority tickets to ensure IT couldn't claim they missed an email. He looked at the tiny green screen. Urgent. FL50. Main boardroom. Projector. Network failure. Immediate response required. Todd materialized beside his desk, practically vibrating. Floor 50. The main boardroom. She's in there. The guillotine. They're trying to pull up the quarterly projections and the network is down. Christian, if you don't fix this in 3 minutes, we are all looking for jobs. Calm down, Todd. It's probably just a loose HDMI or a tripped switch. Christian grabbed his tool bag, a heavy canvas tote filled with cables, crimpers, and compressed air. He walked to the executive elevators. The transition from the rest of the building to floor 50 was jarring. The doors slid open with a soft chime, and suddenly the harsh fluorescent lights were gone, replaced by recessed, warm amber lighting. The air was climate-controlled to the perfect degree, smelling faintly of citrus and expensive leather. The carpet was so thick it swallowed the sound of his scuffed dress shoes entirely. He approached the heavy oak doors of the main boardroom. 2 men in bespoke suits were pacing outside, sweating profusely despite the cool air. "It?" one of them barked, looking at Christian's badge. "Get in there." The feed died right in the middle of the Q3 audit presentation. "Do not make a sound. Just fix it." Christian didn't reply. He pushed the heavy doors open and slipped inside. The boardroom was massive, dominated by a 30-foot mahogany table that gleamed under modern, low-hanging chandeliers. The room was packed with at least 20 executives, but it was dead silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing against the eardrums. The air was thick with tension. At the far end of the room, a massive digital display was completely black. Christian kept his head down. He didn't look at the faces. He reverted to his muscle memory. Become invisible. He walked to the head of the table, dropped to one knee, and crawled under the heavy wood. It was dusty under here. A tangle of black and grey cables hung like cheap spaghetti. He pulled out a small flashlight, holding it in his teeth. He traced the primary network line from the wall port to the floor junction. It had been kicked. The retaining clip was snapped. A careless foot in an expensive shoe had severed the connection. Christian pulled a fresh Ethernet cable from his bag, spliced the head, clamped a new clip onto it with his crimping tool, and shoved it into the port. A tiny green LED blinked to life. He swapped the loose HDMI cord just to be safe. "Screen is back online," a voice muttered from above. Several collective sighs of relief echoed in the room. Christian shoved his tools back into the canvas bag. He wiped a streak of dust off his trousers, took a deep breath, and slid out from under the table. He stood up, intending to slip out the side door, but as he turned, his eyes traveled up the length of the table and locked onto the person sitting at the head of it. The new CEO. The guillotine. She was leaning forward, her hands clasped on the polished wood. She wore a sharp, tailored black blazer. Her dark hair, which had been plastered to her head the night before, was now pulled back into a severe, flawless knot. The grease smudge on her cheek was gone, replaced by immaculate, subtle makeup. But it was her. Christian froze. His hand tightened on the handle of his tool bag. His heart, previously a dull, rhythmic thud of exhaustion, suddenly slammed against his ribs. Camille Dubois was looking at the screen, analyzing whatever graph had just appeared. But the movement of Christian standing up caught her peripheral vision. She turned her head, annoyed at the distraction. Her piercing, icy grey eyes landed on him. Christian watched it happen in slow motion. He saw the irritation in her expression. Then he saw the pause. He saw her eyes narrow, darting from his cheap, ill-fitting suit to the faint coffee stain on his tie, and finally to his face. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. The dark circles under his eyes were identical to the ones he'd worn at the gas station 12 hours ago. The recognition hit her. It wasn't a subtle realization. Her breath hitched. Her hands, resting perfectly still on the mahogany table, twitched. The terrifying, poised billionaire vanished for a fraction of a second, replaced by the shivering woman in the wet trench coat, staring at a crumpled $5 bill. "Is the connection stable now?" a senior VP asked nervously from the middle of the table, breaking the silence. Camille didn't answer him. She didn't look away from Christian. Christian felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. "Look away!" his brain screamed. "Drop your head! Leave!" But he was paralyzed. The sheer absurdity of the universe had pinned him to the floor. The woman he had begrudgingly given his last dollar to, the reason he had eaten dry cereal and planned to steal break-room snacks, was the woman who held his entire livelihood in her impeccably manicured hands. "I asked," the VP started again, his voice trembling slightly. "Ms. Dubois, is the data rendering?" Camille finally blinked. She broke eye contact with Christian, her expression snapping back into a mask of cold authority, so quickly it gave Christian whiplash. "The data is fine, Richard," she said, her voice smooth, commanding, and identical to the one that had argued with the teenage clerk. She didn't look back at Christian. She simply raised a hand and pointed toward the heavy oak doors without looking. "Thank you, IT. You are dismissed." Christian didn't need to be told twice. He turned on his heel, his scuffed shoes making no sound on the thick carpet, and practically fled the room. When the doors shut behind him, he stood in the hallway, his breathing shallow and fast. He leaned against the cool wall, dropping his tool bag. "She knows," he thought. "She recognized me." He pressed the heel of his hand against his closed eyes. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was corporate America. Executives didn't like being reminded of their moments of weakness, especially not by the help. They didn't like debts, and they certainly didn't like a low-level peon knowing they had been stranded at a grimy Texaco, begging a teenager for a phone call. He was going to be fired. Todd was right. The guillotine was going to come down, and she was going to start with the guy who had seen her at her lowest. Christian picked up his bag, his stomach knotting. He had 80 cents in his pocket, a 4-year-old at daycare, and he was about to lose his job. He walked slowly back to the elevator, feeling the overwhelming, crushing weight of gravity pulling him down. The basement felt different when Christian returned to his desk. The ambient hum of the server racks, usually a white noise that bordered on soothing, now sounded like a countdown. It was 2:14 p.m. The rest of the afternoon stretched out before him like a desert. He sat in his cheap, mesh-backed ergonomic chair, which had lost its ergonomics sometime during the Obama administration, and stared at the blinking cursor on his monitor. He didn't open his ticketing queue. There was no point. If you were about to be executed, you didn't worry about mowing the lawn. Todd paced the narrow aisle between the cubicles, his rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the anti-static floor mats. Every time Todd's shadow fell across Christian's desk, Christian braced himself for the inevitable tap on the shoulder. HR is on line 2. Pack up your desk. But the call didn't come. By 4:00 p.m., the lack of a firing squad was somehow worse than the firing squad itself. The anxiety had metastasized from a sharp spike of panic into a dull, throbbing ache at the base of his skull. His stomach let out a low, liquid growl. He hadn't eaten since the generic cornflakes at 6 a.m., and the 80 cents in his pocket wasn't going to buy him anything but a severe case of buyer's remorse at a vending machine. Christian pushed his chair back. The casters snagged on the frayed edge of the mat. He needed to execute his secondary objective for the day. Dinner. He walked down the dim corridor to the IT break room. It was a depressing, windowless square that always smelled faintly of burnt popcorn and whatever microwave atrocity Todd had brought in for lunch. The fluorescent light overhead was dying, flickering rapidly in a way that made the room look like a low-budget horror film. Christian approached the communal pantry. It was a pair of faux wood cabinets, hanging above a sink, permanently stained with coffee rings. He opened the left door. The corporate bounty was bleak. A half-empty box of decaf green tea, 3 packets of artificial sweetener encrusted in an unidentifiable sticky substance, and sitting in the back corner like a holy grail illuminated by the flickering light, a cardboard box of Nature Valley oats and honey granola bars. Christian didn't hesitate. He wasn't grappling with the morality of petty theft. Morality was a luxury for people whose bank accounts had commas. He unzipped his worn canvas messenger bag. He reached into the box and pulled out 5 foil-wrapped twin packs. He dropped them into the bag. The crinkle of the green wrappers sounded deafening in the quiet room. He paused, looking at the 2 remaining bars in the box. He took one more. 6 bars. Crumbled up with a little milk. It was practically a bowl of oatmeal. Lily wouldn't mind. She liked the crunch. He zipped the bag shut, the heavy canvas muting the evidence of his crime. He turned around and nearly collided with Todd. Todd wasn't holding a pink slip. He was holding a sleek, black desk phone receiver, his hand clamped over the mouthpiece. His face was the color of old oatmeal. "What did you do?" Todd whispered, his voice trembling. He smelled of nervous sweat and sour breath. Christian adjusted the strap of his bag, feeling the hard rectangular shapes of the granola bars against his hip. "I fixed the projector, Todd. It was a severed Cat 6 cable. Took me 4 minutes. "I don't mean the projector," Todd hissed, his eyes darting frantically around the empty break room. "I just got a call from the penthouse, the executive assistant to the CEO." The dull ache at the base of Christian's skull flared into a sharp spike. "And she wants you upstairs. Now." Todd pulled the receiver away from his chest, pointing it at Christian like a weapon. "Floor 52, Dubois' private office. Christian, I swear to God, if you said something to her, if you insulted her—" "I didn't say a word to her," Christian said. It was the truth. He hadn't spoken. He had just looked. "Go," Todd commanded, practically shoving him toward the door. "Use the priority elevator. Do not make eye contact with anyone in the lobby. Do whatever she says. Apologize for whatever you did." Christian didn't argue. He walked back to his desk, grabbed his suit jacket from the back of his chair, and slipped it on. The fabric felt stiff and cold. He didn't bother trying to smooth the wrinkles. He walked to the elevator banks, his scuffed shoes leaving the linoleum of the basement and stepping onto the plush carpet of the executive lift. He pressed the button for 52. The doors slid shut, sealing him inside the polished steel box. As the elevator accelerated upward, his stomach dropped. He reached into his pocket, his fingers tracing the outline of the 80 cents. He closed his eyes, listening to the soft, synthetic hum of the cables pulling him toward the guillotine. He just hoped they would let him go back to his desk to get the granola bars before security escorted him out of the building. Floor 52 was entirely different from Floor 50. If Floor 50 was where the executives waged war, Floor 52 was where the monarch watched the carnage from a safe distance. The elevator doors opened silently. There was no hallway, just a massive, open reception area paneled in dark walnut and smoked glass. The air was perfectly still and smelled of ozone, expensive floor polish, and money. A woman sat behind a minimalist reception desk carved from a single block of white marble. She wore a sharply tailored grey suit and a headset that looked like a sleek piece of jewelry. She didn't look up as Christian stepped off the elevator. "Mr. Vance," she said to her monitor. It wasn't a question. "Ms. Dubois is expecting you, through the double doors. Do not knock." Christian swallowed the dry lump in his throat. He walked across the room, his footsteps completely absorbed by the carpet, which was so thick it felt like walking on moss. He reached the heavy, frosted glass double doors, grabbed the brushed steel handles, and pulled. Camille Dubois' office was absurdly large. The far wall was a continuous pane of floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the grey, rain-streaked skyline of Seattle. The Puget Sound was a dark, bruising bruise in the distance. There was no conference table here, no clutter, just a massive desk made of reclaimed wood and steel, and a sitting area with two low-slung, white leather couches. Camille was standing by the window, her back to him, holding a ceramic coffee cup. The rain lashed against the glass, silent from the inside, but the violence of the storm was visible in the way the water sheets distorted the city below. "Close the door, Christian," she said. He pushed the heavy glass doors shut. They clicked with a heavy magnetic seal. The silence in the room became absolute. Camille turned around. She wasn't wearing the severe blazer from the boardroom. She had taken it off, revealing a crisp, white silk blouse. She walked to her desk, set the coffee cup down on a leather coaster, and leaned against the edge of the wood, crossing her arms. She looked at him. Really looked at him. She took in the cheap suit, the stain on his tie, the exhaustion etched deep into the corners of his eyes. There was no hostility in her gaze, but there was no warmth either. It was a clinical assessment. "I don't like loose ends," Camille said softly. Her voice lacked the sharp, combative edge she had used with the teenage clerk, but it carried a weight that made Christian want to step backward. "Neither do I," Christian managed to say. His voice sounded thin, raspy. Camille sighed, a short, controlled exhale. "Last night was an anomaly, a cascade of logistical failures. My driver had a medical emergency. I attempted to drive myself, which I haven't done in 4 years. I took a wrong turn, the alternator failed, and I left my bag in the office. It was a statistical improbability. You don't have to explain it to me," Christian said, keeping his hands at his sides. He wanted to cross his arms, to shield himself, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing him shrink. "I just wanted my milk. You just wanted a phone. You gave me your last $5. "It wasn't my last $5, Christian lied. It was a stupid lie, an instinctual defense mechanism bred from years of pretending everything was fine. Camille's eyes narrowed slightly. She reached behind her, picked up a manila folder from her desk, and tossed it onto the glass surface. It slid smoothly, stopping exactly at the edge nearest to Christian. "I run a data-driven company, Christian. When I saw you in the boardroom, I had my assistant pull your employee file. And then I had her pull your financial records. It's terrifyingly easy when you route your direct deposit through the corporate credit union." Christian felt a hot, prickling flush of anger rise in his chest. "That's illegal. It's a gray area covered under the employee code of conduct you signed regarding financial security clearances," she countered smoothly, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. "But that's irrelevant. I know about the crippling medical debt from your late wife. I know you're 3 months behind on rent. I know your checking account currently holds less than $1. You gave me your last $5. Christian stared at the folder. He felt stripped naked. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on his collarbones. The anger burned hotter, burning away the exhaustion. She had taken his one pathetic act of grace and put it under a microscope, turning his life into a spreadsheet of failures. "What do you want?" Christian asked, his voice dropping an octave, the forced politeness vanishing. "You want a medal for figuring out I'm broke? You brought me up here to fire me so you don't have to look at the guy who saw you begging a teenager for a phone cord?" Camille didn't flinch. "Open the folder." Christian hesitated. He stepped forward, his scuffed shoes sinking into the carpet. He reached out and flipped the manila cover open. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stock paper, a cashier's check, drawn from a private account. It was made out to Christian Vance. The amount was $50,000. Underneath the check was a legal document. It was densely packed with legal jargon, but the bold heading at the top was unmistakable. Severance agreement and non-disclosure contract. Christian stared at the zeros. $50,000. It was more money than he made in a year. It was a clean slate. It was the medical debt gone. It was a new apartment in a neighborhood where Lily could play outside without him holding her hand like a vice. It was groceries that didn't come from a flickering break room. His hands began to shake. He hated that she could see it. "It's 50,000, Camille said quietly, watching his face. "In exchange, you sign the NDA, which states you will never discuss the events of last night, nor any details regarding my personal circumstances. Your employment at Praxis Holdings will be terminated immediately, classified as a mutually agreed redundancy. You'll get glowing references." Christian looked up from the paper. He looked at Camille. She looked relieved. The tension in her shoulders had vanished. She had found a problem, applied capital, and solved it. The ledger was balanced. The gritty, uncomfortable reality of his existence was about to be neatly packaged and escorted out of her building. "You're buying my silence," Christian said. The words tasted like ash. "I am compensating you for a severe inconvenience and ensuring corporate stability," she corrected, retreating behind her boardroom vocabulary. "It's a generous package, Christian. It solves your problems. All of them." Christian looked back down at the check. The crisp, thick paper. The perfectly printed numbers. He thought about the 80 cents in his pocket. He thought about the stolen granola bars in his bag. He thought about the look of hollow panic in Camille's eyes the night before, shivering under the neon lights, entirely powerless. He didn't want to be a martyr. He desperately wanted the money. But as he stared at the contract, a visceral, churning disgust twisted in his gut. She wasn't thanking him. She was erasing him. She was turning his empathy into a liability that needed to be liquidated. If he took the money, he was admitting that she was right, that kindness was a transaction, that dignity had a price tag, and that people like him were just problems to be bought off by people like her. If he took this money, he wouldn't just be unemployed. He would be owned. Christian closed the manila folder. He didn't slide it back. He just left it resting on the edge of the desk. "No," Christian said. Camille frowned, her perfect composure cracking for the first time since the boardroom. "Excuse me?" "No," Christian repeated, his voice surprisingly steady. He reached into his coat pocket, bypassed the 80 cents, and pulled out his cheap, cracked plastic pen. He clicked it once, a loud, sharp sound in the quiet room. He opened the folder again, moved the check aside, and uncapped his pen. He flipped the NDA to the back page. He didn't sign it. Instead, he drew a single, thick line through the signature block. He closed the folder again. "I don't want your severance," Christian said, looking her dead in the eye. "I need my dental insurance. Lily has a cavity that needs filling next month, and I need my paycheck on Thursday so I can buy groceries. You want to balance the ledger? You put a $5 bill in my hand right now, and we are completely square. But I'm keeping my job." Camille stared at him, genuinely bewildered. The calculation had failed. "Christian, be rational. You are refusing $50,000 out of pride. I'm refusing it because it makes me feel like garbage," Christian snapped, the anger finally bleeding into his tone. "I didn't give you that money last night as an investment, Ms. Dubois. I gave it to you because you were freezing and looked pathetic, and I just wanted to go home. You don't get to buy that. You don't get to make me feel dirty for being the only person in that gas station who gave a damn about you." He turned away from the desk, grabbing the handle of the heavy glass door. "Christian," her voice was sharp, a command. He stopped, but he didn't turn around. "I owe you a debt," she said. And for the first time, there was a tremor in her voice, a hint of the woman in the rain. "I do not leave debts unpaid." Christian looked over his shoulder. He saw the billionaire, surrounded by glass and steel, entirely isolated from the world below. "Then pay it forward," Christian said flatly, "and stay out of my basement." He pulled the door open and walked out, his scuffed shoes sinking into the moss-thick carpet, leaving the $50,000 sitting untouched on the reclaimed wood desk. The adrenaline evaporated, somewhere between the 42nd floor and the lobby, leaving Christian feeling like he had been beaten with a bag of wet sand. By the time he stepped out of the revolving doors and back into the Seattle drizzle, his knees were weak. The cold air hit his sweat-dampened shirt, making him shiver violently. He walked toward the subway station, his scuffed shoes slapping against the pavement. With every step, the reality of what he had just done compounded, echoing in his head like a gavel. $50,000. He stopped at a crosswalk, staring blankly at the glowing red hand. A bus roared past, spraying a fine mist of dirty street water onto his trousers. He didn't even flinch. He had just turned down a sum of money that would have altered the trajectory of his life. He could have paid off the hospital bills that still arrived every month in threatening red envelopes. He could have bought a reliable car. He could have slept through the night without the phantom pressure of an eviction notice sitting on his chest. Instead, he kept his pride. It felt completely useless. Pride didn't buy groceries. Pride tasted like copper and bile in the back of his throat. He rode the train in a daze, crushed against the damp coats of other commuters. The air smelled of wet wool, cheap cologne, and the sharp, metallic tang of brake dust. When he finally reached Mrs. Higgins's house, the smell shifted to the familiar, nauseating blend of boiled carrots and dirty diapers. "Daddy!" Lily slammed into his knees. She was wearing a faded yellow t-shirt covered in what looked like dried finger paint. Christian scooped her up. She felt terribly light, but her arms wrapped around his neck with a fierce, suffocating grip. He buried his face in her messy hair. She smelled like cheap baby shampoo and dust. For a second, the crushing weight of his decision lifted. He closed his eyes, grounding himself in the warmth of her small body. "Let's go home, Bug," he whispered. Their apartment was a suffocating fourth-floor walk-up. The hallway carpet was a mottled, depressing brown, permanently stained by decades of spills. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Christian set Lily down and immediately went to the thermostat, pushing it up 2 degrees. It was a luxury he couldn't afford, but he was tired of shivering. Dinner was a box of generic macaroni and cheese, made with water because he was out of milk, and the 80 cents in his pocket wouldn't stretch to a new carton. He watched Lily eat from a chipped plastic bowl at the small laminate kitchen table. For dessert, he pulled 2 of the stolen Nature Valley bars from his canvas bag, unwrapped them, and broke them into pieces. Cookies, Lily said, her eyes lighting up. Yeah, cookies. Christian forced a smile, his jaw tight. He ate his half mechanically. It tasted like sawdust. He didn't sleep. He lay on his lumpy mattress, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a skull. He waited for the email on his phone. The termination notice. Camille Dubois was not a woman who liked being told no. He had challenged her authority, insulted her severance package, and walked out of her office. She was going to fire him. He was sure of it. But Thursday morning arrived without an execution. At 6 a.m., Christian's phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't an email from HR. It was a text alert from his bank. His bi-weekly direct deposit had hit. 14412 house. He lay in the dark, watching the harsh blue light of the screen. Within 10 minutes, he had transferred $950 to his landlord, $150 to the credit card company, and $200 to Mrs. Higgins. The balance shrank to $112.38. That had to cover groceries, utilities, and subway fare for 14 days. The math was suffocating. It always was. When he arrived at the IT basement at 8:30 a.m., Todd was waiting for him. Todd looked like he hadn't slept either. His comb-over was unspooling, hanging limply over his forehead. "You're alive," Todd whispered, leaning over Christian's cubicle wall. "You didn't pack your desk. I checked the directory. You're still in the system." "I'm still here, Todd," Christian said, logging into his terminal. The mechanical clatter of his keyboard felt oddly comforting. "What happened up there?" "I saw her assistant cancel 3 meetings after you left. She was furious, Christian." "What did you say to her?" "I fixed a glitch," Christian said flatly. "It's handled." The morning dragged into the afternoon. Christian buried himself in ticketing queues, resetting passwords for executives who made 50 times his salary, but couldn't remember to capitalize the first letter of their dog's name. Around 2 p.m., the mail cart squeaked down the aisle. The mailroom clerk, a bored college student listening to headphones, tossed a thick, cream-colored envelope onto Christian's desk. It had no postage, just his name, written in sharp, aggressive cursive. Christian Vance. Christian stared at it. His stomach dropped. This is it, he thought. The firing squad. She didn't do it electronically. She's doing it with paper to make a point. He picked up a letter opener and sliced the heavy paper. He reached inside and pulled out the contents. It wasn't a termination letter. It wasn't an NDA. It was a single, crisp, perfectly flat $5 bill. It looked fresh from a mint, the green ink vibrant against the harsh fluorescent lights of the basement. Pinned to the face of Abraham Lincoln was a small, square yellow sticky note. Written in the same aggressive cursive was a single word: balanced. Christian stared at the bill. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel relieved. He just felt an exhausted, hollow burn in his chest. He peeled the sticky note off, crumpled it into a tight little ball, and tossed it into his trash can. He folded the $5 bill in half, shoved it into his pocket to join the 80 cents, and went back to typing. Friday afternoon felt like a slow death. The air in the basement was thick, smelling of overheating silicon and the sour dregs of the coffee pot. Most of the building had mentally clocked out by 3 p.m., but it was tethered to the servers until 5 p.m. sharp. Christian was under a desk, untangling a rat's nest of peripheral cables for a junior analyst who had managed to wrap her mouse cord around her power strip. Dust coated his sleeves. His lower back screamed in protest as he twisted to reach the outlet. Suddenly, the ambient noise of the basement, the clicking keyboards, the low hum of the AC, the distant chatter of technicians, vanished. It didn't just fade. It was severed. Christian paused, a zip tie half fastened in his hands. The silence was heavy, unnatural. He slid backward out from under the desk and stood up, dusting off his knees. He looked down the main aisle of the IT department. Camille Dubois was walking past the server racks. She looked entirely alien in the basement. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit and black stilettos that clicked with terrifying precision against the anti-static floor mats. The dim, flickering fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her sharp cheekbones. She wasn't looking at the ceiling tiles or the stained carpets. She was looking for him. Todd was standing frozen by the water cooler, holding a tiny paper cup, his mouth slightly open. Several other technicians had completely stopped working, staring openly at the CEO as if a tiger had just strolled into a petting zoo. Camille spotted Christian. She didn't pause. She walked straight toward his cubicle, moving with the relentless, kinetic energy of a predator. Christian stood his ground. He didn't smooth his hair or adjust his tie. He just wiped a smear of grey dust off his hands onto his trousers and waited. Camille stepped into his small, cramped workspace. She looked at the worn fabric of his chair, the dual monitors propped up on old textbooks, and the framed photo of Lily sitting next to a chipped coffee mug. She took it all in, processing the data of his existence in a matter of seconds. "Ms. Dubois," Christian said, breaking the silence. His voice was level. "Can I help you with a network issue?" "I sent you what I owed you," she said. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't care who heard. "I received it. I appreciate the exact change." Camille crossed her arms. Up close, Christian could see the faint, purple shadows under her eyes. The immaculate makeup hid it well, but the exhaustion was there, simmering just beneath the surface. She wasn't sleeping either. "You are an irrational variable, Christian," she said, her voice tight. "I don't like irrational variables in my company. I'm not a variable, I'm a Tier 2 technician. You refused a life-altering sum of money out of spite. That defies basic economic logic. It defies human nature." She stepped closer, invading his personal space. She smelled faintly of that expensive, woody perfume, a sharp contrast to the smell of ozone and dust that permeated the cubicle. "Why? And don't give me the same self-righteous speech about dignity you gave me upstairs. Dignity doesn't pay rent." Christian felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of fatigue. He was so tired of this game. He was tired of her trying to psychoanalyze a simple act of humanity to make it fit into her corporate spreadsheet. "You want to know why?" Christian asked, leaning against his desk. He looked her directly in the eyes. "Because you didn't see me." Camille frowned, confused. "I saw exactly who you were. I pulled your file." "You pulled data," Christian snapped, keeping his voice low but letting the anger bleed through. "You saw a debt sheet. You saw a widowed guy with a kid and a negative bank balance, and you assumed that defined my entire existence. You thought that because I'm broke, I must be desperate enough to let you buy my self-respect." He pushed off the desk, closing the distance between them. He was taller than her, but she didn't shrink back. "When I gave you that $5 at the gas station," Christian continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "I didn't do it because I was a good person. I did it because I looked at you, and for 5 seconds, you looked exactly how I feel every single day of my life. Powerless, panicked, stranded." Camille's breath hitched. The icy facade cracked, just a hairline fracture, but Christian saw it. "I gave you that money because I couldn't stand looking at someone else drowning when I knew what it felt like," he said. "I wasn't fixing your problem. I was buying 5 minutes of relief from my own guilt. You didn't owe me $50,000. You owed me a thank you. That's it. But you couldn't handle the fact that a guy who fixes your printers had to bail you out, so you tried to erase it with a check." Camille stared at him. The silence between them stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The hum of the servers seemed incredibly loud. She looked away first. Her gaze drifted to the framed photo of Lily. "I grew up in a trailer park in Reno," Camille said. Her voice was incredibly quiet, almost completely devoid of its usual metallic edge. She didn't look back at him. She just stared at the picture of the smiling 4-year-old. "My mother worked 3 jobs. I wore shoes held together with duct tape until I was 12. I know exactly what it feels like to drown, Christian. I spent 20 years climbing over everyone and everything to make sure I never felt that way again." She slowly turned her eyes back to him. The vulnerability was gone, instantly replaced by the sharp, calculating stare of the CEO, but the ghost of the confession lingered in the air between them. "When I looked at you in that gas station," Camille said, her voice steadying, "I didn't see a savior. I saw the life I spent 2 decades running away from. And I hated you for reminding me it still exists." Christian let out a slow, heavy exhale. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a strange, hollow empathy. They were entirely different species, operating on completely different planets, but they shared the exact same phobia. "It always exists," Christian said quietly. "You just built a taller wall." Camille uncrossed her arms. She reached into the pocket of her tailored jacket and pulled out a small, metallic silver flash drive. She placed it deliberately on the desk, right next to Lily's picture. "I'm restructuring the entire security architecture for Praxis Holdings next quarter," Camille said, shifting effortlessly back into her corporate cadence. "I need an internal project manager, someone who actually understands the subterranean infrastructure of this building, not an executive who only reads summary reports. The salary is $120,000 a year. Full benefits. It starts Monday." Christian stared at the flash drive. He didn't touch it. "Is this another bribe?" "No," Camille said, turning toward the aisle. "It's a promotion. The ledger is balanced, Christian. This is just business. I don't hire people who can be bought easily. They tend to leak data." She didn't wait for an answer. She walked out of his cubicle, her stilettos clicking rhythmically against the floor, leaving Christian alone in the dim light of the basement, staring at the silver drive. The silver flash drive sat on Christian's desk all weekend. It felt unnaturally heavy, a dense little ingot of brushed aluminum that mocked the cheap plastic keyboard and the chipped rim of his coffee mug. He didn't touch it on Friday night. He went home, made Lily a plate of scrambled eggs, and scrubbed the bathtub with a generic bleach powder that burned his nostrils and made his eyes water. He scrubbed until his knuckles ached, trying to physically exhaust the buzzing anxiety humming in his chest. On Saturday, he stared at it, while Lily watched cartoons. The volume of the TV was turned down low, the chaotic, tinny voices of animated animals clashing with the oppressive silence of the apartment. His checking account balance still read $112.38. The rent was due in 11 days. By Sunday night, the exhaustion finally broke him. Christian sat down at his cramped kitchen table, pushed aside a stack of final notice medical bills, and booted up his personal laptop. The cooling fan whined in protest, sounding like a dying mosquito. He plugged the drive into the USB port. There was only one file on the drive, a PDF titled Contract Prac Vance Eid.pdf. He double-clicked it. The glow of the screen cast a harsh, blue light across his face. It was a standard corporate employment contract, devoid of any emotional language, apologies, or references to rainy nights at gas stations. It was brutally clinical. Title: Internal Project Manager, Security Architecture. Floor 34. Base salary, $120,000. Comprehensive health, dental, and vision. Stock options vesting after 24 months. There was no non-disclosure agreement attached. There was no buyout clause. It was exactly what Camille had claimed it to be, a business transaction. She needed someone who knew where the building's weak points were, and she was paying market rate for the data stored in Christian's exhausted brain. Christian scrolled to the final page. A blinking digital signature box waited at the bottom. He typed his name. He hit enter. The screen flashed, confirming the submission. Christian closed the laptop. He didn't feel a sudden rush of euphoria. He didn't jump out of his chair or weep with joy. The transition from survival mode to stability isn't a firework. It's a slow, painful exhalation. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and felt a strange, terrifying emptiness in his chest. The panic that had lived there for 4 years, the cold knot of financial terror, was suddenly gone. He had to learn how to breathe without it. Monday morning in the IT basement was surreal. Christian brought a flattened cardboard box from the recycling bin behind his apartment building. He spent 20 minutes packing his desk. There wasn't much to take. The framed photo of Lily, the chipped mug, a worn pair of wire crimpers he'd bought with his own money because the corporate ones were garbage. Todd hovered at the edge of the cubicle, his comb-over plastered to his forehead with nervous sweat. He smelled strongly of cheap aftershave and anxiety. "Floor 34, Todd whispered, staring at the cardboard box as if it contained a bomb. "That's mid-level executive territory, Christian. They have espresso machines. They have actual sunlight." "What did you do? Are you blackmailing her?" "I'm restructuring the security architecture," Christian said, sealing the box with a strip of packing tape. The sharp tearing sound echoed in the quiet basement. "I know where the dead cables are buried, Todd. That's it. Nobody just skips 32 floors because they know about cables," Todd muttered, taking a step back. "You're a ghost, Christian. You're swimming with the sharks now." "I've always been swimming with sharks," Christian replied, picking up the box. The cardboard was rough against his palms. "Now I'm just getting paid to map the tank." He walked to the priority elevator, the same one he had taken to the penthouse just days ago. He swiped his new digital credential on his phone. The scanner chirped a pleasant green. He stepped inside, leaving the hum of the servers behind. Floor 34 was a different universe. The light was natural, pouring in from massive perimeter windows. The carpet was a muted slate grey, thick enough to absorb sound, but firm enough for office chairs to roll smoothly. The air smelled of fresh coffee and ozone, clean and aggressively filtered. His new office wasn't a corner suite, but it had a door. A heavy, frosted glass door with his name printed on a small brushed steel plaque. Christian Vance, project manager. He set his box down on the polished laminate desk. The chair was a Herman Miller, heavy and perfectly calibrated. He sat down. His back, perpetually knotted from years of hunching over basement workbenches, was instantly supported. He looked out the window. The Seattle skyline stretched out beneath him, a jagged grid of concrete and glass. He wasn't at the top, looking down on everyone like a monarch. But he wasn't buried in the foundation anymore, either. He was somewhere in the middle. The altitude made him slightly dizzy. 2 weeks later, the first paycheck hit his account. Christian was standing in the kitchen at 6 a.m., pouring tap water into the coffee maker. His phone buzzed. He picked it up, swiping the notification open. Direct deposit, Praxis Holdings. 34 of $252. He stared at the number. The screen blurred. He blinked hard, wiping the back of his hand across his eyes. He opened his banking app, transferred the rent, paid the entirety of the lingering credit card balance, and fully funded Mrs. Higgins for the month. When he was done, the balance read $1,800. He walked into Lily's room. She was asleep, tangled in her faded dinosaur blankets. The room smelled of warm cotton and sleep. Christian stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the soft, rhythmic sound of her breathing. He wasn't going to buy a sports car. He wasn't going to buy a bespoke suit. He was going to buy name-brand milk. He was going to take his daughter to the dentist. The luxury of the middle class wasn't yachts or penthouses. It was the profound, quiet luxury of simply not being afraid. 3 months later, the relentless Seattle rain had turned into a bitter, biting sleet that rattled against the thick glass of the Praxis Holdings tower. Christian sat in the main boardroom on floor 50. He was no longer crawling under the mahogany table. He was sitting halfway down its length, wearing a dark navy suit that actually fit his shoulders. He still wore his scuffed, rubber-soled shoes, a stubborn grounding mechanism he refused to abandon, but his tie was clean, and the dark circles under his eyes had faded from a bruised purple to a faint, manageable grey. The room was packed with the same executives who had panicked over the broken projector months ago. They were currently listening to Christian project a structural mapping of the company's firewall vulnerabilities. The legacy systems in the basement are bleeding bandwidth, Christian explained, clicking to the next slide. His voice was steady, projecting easily across the polished wood. The executive layer is secure, but the foundation is rotting. If someone wants to breach Praxis, they aren't coming through the penthouse. They're coming through the HVAC nodes on the subterranean levels. We need to tear out the copper and lay fiber. That's a $3 million infrastructure overhaul, Richard, the senior VP, argued, wiping his forehead with a linen handkerchief. For the basement, it's excessive. It's practical, Camille Dubois said. Her voice cut through the murmurs of the boardroom like a scalpel. She was sitting at the head of the table, wearing a stark white blazer, her dark hair pulled into its signature severe knot. Mr. Vance spent 4 years in that basement, Richard, Camille continued, her icy grey eyes sweeping the room. He knows what a rotting foundation looks like. We are approving the overhaul. The meeting is adjourned. The executives scrambled to pack their leather folios. Nobody argued with the guillotine. They filed out of the heavy oak doors, eager to escape the atmospheric pressure of her presence. Christian stayed seated, shutting down his presentation laptop. The room emptied, leaving only the two of them. The silence settled over the boardroom, heavy but no longer terrifying. Camille stood up, walking toward the windows. She looked out at the sleet violently striking the glass. $3 million is a hard sell to the board, Christian, she said, her back to him. It'll save you $12 million in data ransom when the legacy servers eventually fail, Christian replied, sliding his laptop into his leather messenger bag, a recent upgrade from the frayed canvas tote. Camille turned around. She leaned against the glass, crossing her arms. The harsh winter light made her look sharp, immaculate, and utterly untouchable. But Christian no longer saw a billionaire. He just saw a fiercely intelligent woman who guarded her survival just as aggressively as he guarded his. You're adapting well to the altitude, she noted, her gaze dropping briefly to his scuffed shoes before returning to his face. A microscopic smirk touched the corner of her mouth, though your footwear remains aggressively insubordinate. They have traction, Christian said, standing up and slinging the bag over his shoulder. Floors get slippery. Camille held his gaze for a second. The subtext hung in the air between them, an invisible wire of mutual understanding. There was no romance. There was no cinematic blurring of boundaries. They were two people who had survived the deep water, currently standing on the deck of the same ship. Keep the foundation secure, Christian, she said softly, turning back to the storm. Always, Christian replied. He walked out of the boardroom. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind him. At 5:30 p.m., Christian clocked out. He didn't take the subway. He walked 3 blocks to a private parking garage and got into a used but incredibly reliable Honda CR-V The heater worked perfectly, blasting hot air within 30 seconds. He drove to a new daycare in a better neighborhood. It smelled of cinnamon, construction paper, and eucalyptus, not boiled carrots. Lily ran toward him, wearing a bright purple sweater, her face completely clean. "Daddy!" she yelled, practically launching herself into his arms. Christian caught her, swinging her up. She was getting heavier. He didn't feel the sharp ache in his back anymore. "Hey, Bug," he smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Grocery store time, you ready?" "Cookies?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Yeah, the real ones this time, not the stolen oats." They walked through the brightly lit aisles of the supermarket. The fluorescent lights here didn't hum with a sickly buzz. They were bright and clean. Christian pushed the cart, letting Lily toss in whatever caught her eye. Strawberries out of season, 3 different boxes of cereal, the expensive, thick-cut bacon. He stopped in the dairy aisle. He opened the glass door and pulled out a full gallon of organic whole milk. It was heavy, cold, and perfect. At the checkout line, the cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, scanned the mountain of food. "That'll be $142.16, she said cheerfully. Christian didn't flinch. His heart rate didn't spike. He didn't mentally calculate which items he needed to put back to avoid a declined card. He simply reached into his back pocket and pulled out his cheap leather wallet. He opened it to retrieve his matte black corporate bank card. As he slid the plastic out of the slot, his thumb brushed against paper. Tucked securely in the cash fold, entirely alone, was a single, crisp $5 bill. It was pristine, the green ink vibrant, completely untouched since the day he had pulled it out of a heavy cream envelope in the basement. Christian looked at Abraham Lincoln's stoic face. He felt the grounding weight of it. It was a reminder of the freezing rain, the neon lights of the gas station, and the terrifying vulnerability of having nothing left. It was a promise to never forget what it felt like to be invisible. He tapped his debit card on the terminal. A small beep confirmed the transaction. "Have a good night, sir," the cashier smiled. "You too," Christian said. He folded his wallet, slid it back into his pocket, and picked up the heavy grocery bags. The weight felt good in his hands. He grabbed Lily's small hand, walked out into the cold Seattle evening, and went home. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who knows the real weight of $1. We navigate a world obsessed with price tags, but true dignity is never for sale. Subscribe to the channel for more grounded, raw storytelling that strips away the fairy tale and dives into the gritty reality of human connection. Leave a comment below about a time you had to stand your ground. Your daily support keeps these short stories alive. Do not forget to ring the notification bell. I will see you next time, friends. Goodbye.